The summer. Mara was left to die. The wagon didn't even slow down when it threw her out. 10-year-old Mara Caldwell hit the Montana dirt hard, tasting blood and dust as the wheels that had carried her for 3 days rattled away into the shimmering heat. Mrs. Carmichael didn't look back. The sun blazed overhead like a forge hammer, turning the prairie into a furnace. Mara's bare feet blistered on stones hot enough to cook on. Her canteen held maybe 2 swallows. The nearest town was 15 miles behind her. Ahead, nothing but endless grass and heat that could kill a grown man in hours. She was alone. If you want to know whether Mara survived that brutal summer day, stay with me until the very end of this story. And please, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far Mara's journey reaches across the world. The heat wasn't just uncomfortable. It was predatory. Mara had heard the ranch hands back in Billings talk about summer sun on the open prairie like it was a living thing with teeth and intention. She thought they were exaggerating the way adults did to scare children into obedience. Now, stumbling forward on feet that screamed with every step, she understood they'd been telling the simple truth. The Montana summer didn't forgive. It didn't negotiate. It simply consumed. She'd been walking for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one when the first wave of dizziness hit. The landscape tilted sideways, and Mara dropped to her knees in the sparse grass, pressing her palms against earth so hot it felt like punishment. Her vision swam with dark spots that bloomed and faded like ink in water. "Get up," she told herself. "Get up or die here." The words came in her mother's voice, not the slurred, distant voice from the last year before the fever took her, but the clear, firm voice from before. From when Mara had been small enough to believe that mothers didn't leave, that homes didn't disappear, that people who said they'd care for you actually meant it. She'd learned better since then. Mara forced herself upright and kept walking, though her shadow had shrunk to almost nothing beneath her feet. Noon, the worst possible time to be exposed like this, with no shade for miles in any direction and the sun directly overhead, turning her dark hair into a heat trap and her thin cotton dress into something that might as well have been made of nettles. The canteen bumped against her hip with each step, nearly empty now. She'd rationed the water carefully at first, allowing herself only small sips when her throat closed up so tight she couldn't swallow. But fear had made her careless an hour ago, and she'd drunk too much at once, leaving barely enough to wet her tongue. Mrs. Carmichael had given her the canteen along with the crust of bread and a handkerchief that morning, pressing them into Mara's hands with the kind of tight-lipped efficiency that made it clear these were the last things she'd ever give. "You're too much trouble," Mrs. Carmichael had said, not unkindly but not gently either, just stating a fact the way someone might comment on the weather. "I took you in as a favor to your mother, God rest her, but I've got my own blood to feed, 3 children of my own and a husband who drinks. I can't carry another mouth, especially one that attracts the kind of attention you do." Mara hadn't argued. She'd learned not to argue. The attention Mrs. Carmichael referred to had come from a man named Silas Pettigrew, who'd visited the Carmichael homestead twice looking for available girls to work in his establishment in Miles City. Both times, Mrs. Carmichael had sent him away, but the second time her voice had been less certain. Her husband had lost money on a bad wheat crop. Winter was coming, though it seemed impossible to imagine winter now, with heat radiating up from the ground in visible waves. "I won't sell you," Mrs. Carmichael had said that morning, helping Mara into the wagon before sunrise. "I'm not that kind of woman. But I can't keep you either. There's a mission in Billings, Sisters of Mercy. They take in girls like you. I'm pointing you in the right direction, and that's more than some would do." Except Mrs. Carmichael hadn't pointed her toward Billings at all. She'd driven the wagon out into the empty country between towns, stopped on a cattle trail that hadn't seen traffic in weeks, and told Mara to get out. "Follow the trail south," she'd said, not meeting Mara's eyes. "Stay in the shade when you can. Someone will come along eventually. Someone always does." Then she'd driven away, the wagon wheels kicking up dust that hung in the still air long after she'd disappeared. No one had come. Mara's vision blurred again, and this time when she stumbled, she didn't catch herself properly. Her knee cracked against a rock, and the pain was sharp enough to cut through the fog in her head for a moment. She looked down and saw blood welling up through the torn fabric of her dress, bright red against skin that had gone an unhealthy grayish color. The sight of her own blood should have frightened her. Instead, it felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. She thought about stopping, just sitting down in the grass and waiting for whatever came next. The heat would take her eventually, probably faster than thirst would, the way she was sweating. Her dress clung to her back, soaked through despite the fact that she'd long since stopped feeling like she had any moisture left to lose. But something in her refused to sit down. Some stubborn core that had survived her mother's death, the months in the Carmichael house sleeping in a corner of the kitchen, the way Mrs. Carmichael's own children had looked at her like she was something dirty that had wandered in from outside. The same part that had kept her silent when she was hungry, grateful when she was given scraps, invisible when men like Silas Pettigrew came looking. That part wouldn't let her stop walking, so she didn't. The prairie stretched out endlessly in all directions, broken only by distant ridges that shimmered in the heat like they were melting. No trees, no buildings, no shade, just grass and sky and sun that pressed down with physical weight. Mara's thoughts began to drift in strange directions. She found herself remembering things she hadn't thought about in years. Her mother braiding her hair by lamplight, the taste of the honey cake they'd shared on Mara's 6th birthday, the way the rain had sounded on the roof of their cabin before her father left. The memories felt more real than the ground beneath her feet. She was so lost in them that she almost didn't hear the hoofbeats. At first she thought it was her imagination, another cruel trick played by heat and dehydration. But the sound grew louder, more distinct, accompanied by the creak of leather and the soft snort of a horse. Mara turned, moving so slowly her neck creaked, and saw him. A rider, emerging from the heat haze like something conjured from desperate prayer. He sat tall in the saddle on a big roan horse, silhouetted against the white-hot sky. For a moment, he seemed like a mirage, too perfect to be real. Then he spoke, and his voice was real enough, deep and rough, with an edge of surprise that suggested he hadn't expected to find anyone out here any more than she'd expected to be found. "Jesus Christ," he said, swinging down from the saddle with swift efficiency. "What the hell are you doing out here?" Mara opened her mouth to answer, but her throat had closed up completely. No sound came out. Her legs gave way and she felt herself falling, but she never hit the ground. The man caught her, his hands broad and calloused, steadying her with surprising gentleness for someone so large. Up close, she could see he was older than she'd first thought, maybe 40, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair shot through with silver. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and sharp, taking in her condition with the kind of quick assessment that spoke of experience with emergencies. "When did you last drink?" he asked, already reaching for his own canteen. Mara tried to answer, but her tongue felt like leather. She made a small sound that might have been meant as words, but came out as nothing more than a croak. The man didn't wait for clarification. He uncapped the canteen and held it to her lips, supporting her head with his other hand. "Slow," he commanded. "Just small sips, or you'll sick it right back up." The water was warm but tasted like salvation. Mara wanted to gulp it down, to drink until the canteen was empty, but the man controlled the flow, letting her have only a little at a time. When he finally pulled it away, she made a small sound of protest. "More in a minute," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "First, I need to get you out of this sun before you cook through." He lifted her onto his horse with the kind of easy strength that suggested he was used to handling weight. The saddle leather was hot against her legs, but the horse shifted beneath her with patient steadiness, and for the first time in hours, Mara wasn't standing on ground that burned. The man swung up behind her, settling her against his chest and taking the reins in one hand while keeping the other arm around her waist to hold her steady. "I'm Beckett Hale," he said, turning the horse's head north, away from the direction she'd been walking. "My ranch is about 3 miles from here. Can you hold on that long?" Mara managed a small nod. Her head felt too heavy for her neck, and she let it fall back against his shoulder. He smelled like leather and sage, and something else she couldn't quite identify. Something clean and alive that was the opposite of the death she'd been walking toward. "What's your name?" Beckett asked, as the horse started moving at a smooth walk that barely jostled her. "Mara." Her voice came out as a whisper, but he heard it. "All right, Mara. Stay awake for me. I know you're tired, but you need to stay awake until we get you inside and cool down properly. Can you do that?" She nodded again, though keeping her eyes open felt like pushing against a weight. The landscape slid past them in a blur of gold and brown, and she focused on the rhythm of the horse's gait, the steady presence of the man behind her, the fact that she wasn't alone anymore. "Who left you out here?" Beckett's voice had gone harder, anger threading through it like wire. "Where are your people?" "Gone," Mara managed. Said, "Too much trouble." A muscle worked in Beckett's jaw. She could feel it where her head rested against him. "Too much trouble," he repeated, and the words came out flat and cold. Christ. They rode in silence after that, though Beckett kept checking her awareness by asking simple questions. Her age, where she'd come from, how long she'd been walking. Mara answered when she could, her voice growing a little stronger as the water worked its way into her system. The ranch appeared gradually on the horizon, first just a dark line against the sky, then resolving into buildings and fences and the welcome sight of trees. Cottonwoods, Mara realized as they drew closer, their leaves flickering silver in the hot breeze. The sight of that shade, the promise of relief from the relentless sun, made something tight in her chest finally loosen. The ranch was bigger than any homestead Mara had ever seen. The main house stood 2 stories tall, painted white, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and sides. Outbuildings dotted the property, a barn, a bunkhouse, several sheds, corrals where horses stood, with their heads lowered in the heat. Everything looked well-maintained but weathered, built to last through the extremes of Montana seasons. A woman emerged from the house as they approached, shading her eyes against the sun. She was perhaps 50, tall and angular, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a face that suggested she didn't suffer fools gladly. "Mr. Hale," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "You're back early. I wasn't expecting—" She stopped mid-sentence as she caught sight of Mara. "Lord have mercy, what happened?" "Found her on the cattle trail," Beckett said, dismounting and lifting Mara down with careful hands. "Abandoned, by the look of it. Heat stroke, dehydration. Dottie, I need cool water, not cold, clean cloths, and open up the spare room on the first floor. All the windows." The woman, Dottie, didn't waste time asking questions. She turned and strode back into the house, already calling out instructions to someone Mara couldn't see. Beckett carried her up the porch steps and through a door that opened into blessed dimness. The temperature inside was still warm, but it was at least 15 degrees cooler than the murderous heat outside, and Mara felt her body sag with relief. "Almost there," Beckett said, carrying her down a hallway and into a room where Dottie was already throwing open windows and pulling down shades to create a cross breeze. "Dottie Briggs, this is Mara. Mara, Mrs. Briggs keeps this house running and keeps me from starving when I'm too stubborn to come in for meals. Flattery won't make me forget you tracked dirt across my clean floors," Dottie said, but her hands were gentle as she took Mara from Beckett and laid her on a bed that felt like clouds after the hard ground. "Lord, child, you're burning up. Mr. Hale, get out. This is women's work now." Beckett didn't argue. He retreated to the doorway, hovering there with clear reluctance. "I'll send Isaiah for Doc Pritchard." "Good," Dottie said, already unbuttoning Mara's dress with efficient fingers. "And tell him to bring his full kit. This is more than simple dehydration." Over the next hour, Mara drifted in and out of awareness as Dottie worked over her with the precision of a field surgeon. Cool cloths appeared on her forehead, her wrists, the back of her neck. Water came in careful sips, then in larger amounts as Mara's body remembered how to process it. Someone, a man's voice she didn't recognize, rode out, and later, new voices filtered into the room. "Heat stroke," a man said, his voice carrying the authority of education. "But you've done well, Mrs. Briggs. Her core temperature is coming down. The question now is whether there's been any organ damage." "She's strong," Dottie said firmly. "Look at her hands. She's used to work. And she's still fighting. That counts for something." "It does indeed," the doctor agreed. "But she'll need monitoring for the next several days. Any fever, any confusion, any problems urinating, and I want to know immediately." Mara wanted to tell them she could hear everything they were saying, that she wasn't as far gone as they seemed to think, but her tongue felt too heavy and the effort seemed too great. Instead, she let the voices wash over her like water, anchoring her to the world even as exhaustion pulled her down into darkness. When she woke again, the light had changed. The harsh white glare of noon had softened to the golden amber of late afternoon. The breeze through the open windows carried the scent of grass and horses and something cooking that made her stomach clench with sudden, fierce hunger. Dottie sat in a chair beside the bed, mending something with quick, practiced stitches. She looked up when Mara stirred, setting the mending aside. "There you are," she said, reaching over to feel Mara's forehead with the back of her hand. "Better. Still warm, but better. How's your head?" "Hurts," Mara whispered. "And I'm thirsty." Both are expected. Dottie poured water from a pitcher into a glass and helped Mara sit up enough to drink. "Slowly now. Your stomach's been empty too long to rush things." The water tasted better than anything Mara could remember. She drank half the glass before Dottie gently pulled it away. "More in a bit," Dottie said. "First, let's see if you can keep that down. Then maybe some broth." "Where am I?" Mara asked, though she remembered pieces. The horse. The man. The ride that had saved her life. "Hale Ranch," Dottie said, settling back into her chair and picking up her mending again. "Beckett Hale's place. He found you on the cattle trail and brought you here. That was, 7 hours ago now. You've been sleeping mostly, which is what you needed." "I don't have money," Mara said, the words coming out in a rush of panic. "To pay. I don't have anything." Dottie's expression softened slightly. "Nobody's asking you for money, child. Mr. Hale isn't that kind of man." "Then what kind of man is he?" It was a bold question, maybe too bold, but Mara had learned that understanding the people you depended on was the difference between surviving and not surviving. Dottie considered the question seriously, her needle pausing mid-stitch. "The kind who doesn't ride past someone dying in the heat," she said finally. "The kind who built this ranch from nothing after his wife and daughter died of scarlet fever 8 years ago. The kind who works himself half to death because sitting still means thinking, and thinking means remembering what he lost." The words painted a picture Mara understood too well. Grief that turned into motion, loss that became labor. She'd seen it in her father before he left, in her mother before the fever took her. Recognizing it in Beckett Hale made him feel less like a stranger and more like someone who might understand why she didn't cry when she talked about being thrown out of the wagon. "How old are you, Mara?" Dottie asked, returning to her mending. 10, I think. Maybe 11 now. I'm not sure what month it is." "August," Dottie said. "August 14th. "Then I'm 11, Mara said. "My birthday was in July." "Happy belated birthday." Dottie's tone was dry, but there was something almost gentle underneath it. Some present getting abandoned in the middle of nowhere. "Better than the alternative," Mara said softly. Dottie's hands stilled. "What alternative?" Mara hesitated, then decided honesty was probably safer than evasion. "Mrs. Carmichael, the woman I was staying with. She was going to sell me to a man who runs a place in Miles City. A bad place. She said she wouldn't, but I heard her husband talking about the money Mr. Pettigrew offered. She threw me out instead." The mending dropped into Dottie's lap, her face going hard as granite. "Lord preserve us," she said quietly. "What's the world coming to when a woman has to choose between selling a child and abandoning one in the heat?" "She made the better choice," Mara said, and meant it. "I'd rather die in the sun than live in the kind of place Mr. Pettigrew runs." Dottie looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "You're tougher than you look, aren't you?" "I'm alive," Mara said simply. "That's all that matters." A knock on the doorframe interrupted them. Beckett stood there, hat in his hands, his presence somehow filling the doorway despite the fact that he wasn't particularly tall, just solid and certain in a way that suggested immovability. "How's she doing?" he asked Dottie, though his eyes were on Mara. "Awake and talking sense," Dottie reported. "No fever, kept down water. I'd say she's past the worst of it, though she'll be weak for a few days yet." Beckett nodded slowly, turning the hat in his hands. "Good. That's good." He looked directly at Mara then, his storm gray eyes serious. "I need to ask you some questions, Mara, about who left you out there and why. Can you handle that right now, or should I come back later?" "Now's fine," Mara said, pushing herself up to sitting despite the way the room tilted slightly. She wanted this conversation over with, wanted to know what happened next before she let herself get comfortable in a bed that didn't belong to her. Beckett pulled over another chair and sat down, his movements careful and deliberate. "Tell me what happened," he said. "All of it." So Mara did. She told him about her mother's death 2 years ago, about how there'd been no other family and the church had placed her with the Carmichaels. She told him about Mrs. Carmichael's husband and his drinking, about the failed wheat crop and the money problems, about Silas Pettigrew and his visits. She told him about the morning drive, about being left on the cattle trail with a canteen and a crust of bread and directions to walk toward a mission that was in the wrong direction. She told it all flatly, without emotion, because that was the only way she knew how to tell it without breaking. When she finished, Beckett sat silent for a long moment, his jaw tight and his hands gripping his hat hard enough that the brim bent. Finally he spoke, his voice carefully controlled. "The Carmichael place. Do you know where it is?" "What town?" "Near Billings," Mara said. "About 5 miles outside, to the east. The homestead has a windmill with one broken blade." Beckett nodded slowly. "And this Silas Pettigrew? You said Miles City?" "That's what Mrs. Carmichael said." Mara watched his face, trying to read his intentions. "Are you going to take me back?" "Take you back?" Beckett's voice sharpened. "To the people who threw you out to die? Not a chance in hell." "Then where am I going?" The question hung in the air. Dottie had stopped mending entirely, watching Beckett with an expression Mara couldn't quite read. "That depends," Beckett said slowly, "on what you want. Doc Pritchard says you'll need at least a week to recover fully. Maybe 2. You're welcome to stay here that long, no questions asked, no expectations. After that," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "After that, I can take you to the mission in Billings, if that's what you want, or help you find other family if you have any, or—" "Or?" Mara prompted when he trailed off. Beckett exchanged a look with Dottie, some silent communication passing between them. When he looked back at Mara, his expression was serious but not unkind. "Or you could stay here," he said. "This ranch is big. Too big for just me and Dottie and the hands. There's room and there's work that needs doing, not hard labor," he added quickly. "You're a child, not a ranch hand. But Dottie could use help in the house, and you'd earn your keep honest. You'd have a bed, regular meals, and a place that's safe." It was the kind of offer Mara had learned to distrust. Too good, too generous, usually hiding some catch that would bite later. She studied Beckett's face, looking for the lie, the angle, the thing he wasn't saying. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "You don't know me. I'm nobody." "You're somebody who needs help," Beckett said simply, "and I'm somebody who can provide it. That seems like reason enough to me." "People don't just help," Mara said, her voice harder than she meant it to be. "Not without wanting something back." Something flickered in Beckett's eyes, pain maybe, a recognition of a truth he wished wasn't true. "Most people don't," he agreed. "But some do. You'll have to decide for yourself which kind I am." Dottie cleared her throat. "Mr. Hale lost his wife and daughter 8 years ago," she said, her voice matter-of-fact but not unkind. "He's got a hole in his life the size of Montana, and he fills it with work and with helping people who need it. That's not charity, that's survival. For him as much as for the folks he helps." "Dottie," Beckett said, a warning in his voice. "She's smart enough to know when she's being soft-soaped," Dottie said, not looking at him. "Better she hears the truth straight. You want to help her because helping her helps you feel less empty. That's honest. Nothing wrong with honest." Mara looked between them, processing this. It made sense in a way that pure charity didn't. She understood trading, her survival for his sense of purpose, her work for his food and shelter. That was something she could trust because it benefited both sides. "I'd want my own room," she said carefully, "and I won't do laundry or cooking until I know nobody's going to bother me. After I know it's safe." Beckett's expression went dark. "Nobody here will bother you," he said, each word precise and hard. "Not the hands, not anyone. I give you my word on that, and my word means something in this valley. Anyone breaks it, they answer to me." "Your word doesn't mean much if I don't know you," Mara pointed out. "Fair," Beckett said. "So let's get to know each other. You stay for 2 weeks, trial basis, both ways. You see if you feel safe here, if you can trust what I'm telling you. I see if this arrangement works for everyone. At the end of 2 weeks, we talk again. If you want to go to the mission, I'll take you myself. If you want to stay, we work out terms properly. Sound reasonable? It sounded better than reasonable. It sounded like the first genuinely fair offer anyone had made Mara since her mother died. She wanted to accept immediately, but caution held her back. What about the Carmichaels? She asked. Or the church? Won't they come looking? Let me worry about that, Beckett said. The Carmichaels abandoned you. They've got no legal standing to claim you back. As for the church, we'll sort that out properly if you decide to stay permanent. For now, you're here recovering from heat stroke. That's not anybody's business, but ours. Mara nodded slowly. 2 weeks trial, she said, and my own room. Your own room, Beckett agreed. Upstairs, northwest corner. It gets the best breeze in summer and the best sun in winter. Used to be. He stopped himself. It's yours if you want it. Used to be his daughter's, Mara finished silently. The room he hadn't been able to bring himself to change or close up, now being offered to a half-dead stranger because he needed to fill empty spaces as much as she needed a place to exist. All right, she said. 2 weeks. Relief crossed Beckett's face so quickly she almost missed it. He stood, settling his hat back on his head. Good. Get some rest. Dottie, when she's ready for food, start with broth and work up to solids slowly. I'll be in the barn if anyone needs me. He left before either of them could respond, his boots heavy on the floorboards. Dottie watched him go, then turned back to her mending with a small shake of her head. That man, she said, but there was affection under the exasperation. Doesn't know how to ask for what he needs, so he pretends he's just being practical. Is he a good man? Mara asked quietly. Dottie considered the question, her needle moving in steady rhythm. I've worked for Beckett Hale for 6 years, she said finally. In that time, I've seen him work himself sick, seen him give away cattle to families who needed food for winter, seen him sit with dying ranch hands when they had no family to sit with them. I've never seen him raise his voice to someone weaker than him. Never seen him take advantage. Never seen him turn someone away who needed help. She paused, meeting Mara's eyes. So yes, he's a good man, just a broken one, same as most of us. Mara settled back against the pillows, feeling the exhaustion pulling at her again. Her body was still recovering, still processing everything it had been through. But for the first time since her mother died, she felt something almost like hope stirring in her chest. Maybe this place would turn out to be another disappointment. Maybe Beckett Hale would turn out to be less than what he seemed. Maybe she'd be on the road again in 2 weeks, looking for the next temporary haven. But maybe not. Maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found somewhere she could stop running. Outside, the summer sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, the heat finally releasing its stranglehold on the day. Through the open window, Mara could hear horses moving in the corral, the low voices of men finishing their work, the steady rhythm of a ranch settling into evening. It sounded like permanence. It sounded like home. Whether it would become either of those things remained to be seen, but for now, for this moment, it was enough to be alive, to be safe, to be somewhere that hadn't thrown her away. The rest would come in time. The first week passed in a haze of heat and careful healing. Mara spent most of it in the northwest corner room, learning the rhythms of the ranch through open windows and the sounds that drifted up from below. She learned to recognize Beckett's voice among the others, deeper, quieter, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry authority. She learned Dottie's schedule by the smells that rose from the kitchen, bread baking at dawn, coffee strong enough to strip paint, the rich scent of stew simmering for the evening meal. She learned that the ranch employed 5 regular hands and took on day workers during roundup season. She learned their names by listening to Dottie talk while bringing up meals. Isaiah Cole, the segundo who'd been with Beckett since the beginning, Martin Webb, who was good with horses but terrible with people, young Tommy Fisher, barely 18 and still learning, and 2 brothers named Jack and Samuel Reese, who argued constantly but worked like they shared one mind. By the 4th day, Mara was strong enough to sit by the window for hours at a time, watching the ranch operate below her. She saw Beckett working alongside his men, no different from any other hand except that when problems arose, everyone naturally turned to him for decisions. She saw the way he handled the horses, firm but never harsh, patient even when they tested him. She saw him stop work in the middle of the day to help Tommy fix a fence rail the boy had set wrong, showing him the right way without making him feel stupid for not knowing. On the 6th day, Dottie declared her well enough to come downstairs for meals. "You'll take it slow," Dottie said, helping Mara into a dress she'd altered to fit, a simple blue cotton that had belonged to someone else but was clean and whole. "No running around, no heavy lifting. Mr. Hale wants you fully recovered before you start any kind of work. And what Mr. Hale wants, Mr. Hale gets." "Is he always this stubborn?" Mara asked, letting Dottie button up the back of the dress. "Stubborn?" Dottie snorted. "That man wrote the book on stubborn. Once he decides something's right, you'd have better luck moving a mountain with a teaspoon than changing his mind." The stairs felt steeper than Mara expected, and her legs shook by the time she reached the bottom. But the weakness was temporary, she knew, a result of too much time in bed rather than anything permanent. Her body was young and resilient, already knitting itself back together from the damage the sun had done. The kitchen was larger than the entire Carmichael house had been, with a cast-iron stove that dominated one wall and windows that let in the morning light. A long wooden table stretched down the center, scarred from years of use but scrubbed clean. Beckett sat at one end, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee, still in his work clothes despite the early hour. He looked up when Mara entered, and something in his expression softened. "There you are," he said, folding the paper and setting it aside. "Dottie says you're feeling stronger." "Yes, sir," Mara said, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. "None of that," Beckett said, gesturing to the chair nearest him. "We don't stand on ceremony here. Sit down before you fall down. You're still pale as milk." Mara sat, grateful to be off her feet. Dottie appeared from the pantry with a plate of eggs and toast, setting it in front of her with a firmness that suggested refusing to eat wasn't an option. "Small bites," Dottie warned. "Your stomach's still remembering how to handle real food." The eggs were perfectly cooked, the toast buttered, and still warm. Mara ate slowly, aware of Beckett's presence across the table, but trying not to seem like she was watching him. He'd gone back to his newspaper, giving her space to eat without the pressure of conversation, and she appreciated that more than he probably knew. "We're bringing in a small herd from the upper pasture today," Beckett said after a while, not looking up from the paper. "Mostly yearlings that need sorting. If you're up for it later, you can watch from the corral fence. Isaiah's good at explaining what's happening if you're curious about how the ranch works." It was carefully casual, the offer made in a way that didn't require acceptance. Mara recognized the tactic, giving her choices, letting her control what she did and when she did it, building trust through small freedoms. "I'd like that," she said. Beckett nodded, finally looking up with something that might have been approval. "Good. Isaiah knows you're here, and he knows to answer questions but not ask them. None of the hands will bother you. They know better." "What did you tell them?" Mara asked, then worried the question was too bold. "About me, I mean." "The truth," Beckett said simply. "That I found you abandoned on the trail, that you're recovering here, and that anyone who makes you uncomfortable answers to me personally. That was enough." Footsteps on the back porch announced company before the door swung open. A man entered, tall and lean, with skin the color of saddle leather and gray threaded through his dark hair. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd earned his place and knew it, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. "Morning, boss," he said to Beckett, then nodded to Dottie. "Ma'am?" His eyes found Mara and he smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face into something unexpectedly kind. "You must be Mara. I'm Isaiah Cole. Good to see you on your feet." "Thank you," Mara said quietly. Isaiah poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove, leaning against the counter with the ease of long familiarity. "Boss says you might want to watch the sorting later. You're welcome to, but fair warning, it's hot work and there's a lot of dust. Might want to keep that in mind if you're still recovering." "I'll be careful," Mara said. "I'm sure you will," Isaiah said, his tone suggesting he knew exactly how careful she'd been to survive this long. "But if you get tired or it's too much, nobody's going to think less of you for heading back inside. This ranch will still be here tomorrow." It was kindly meant, and Mara recognized the implicit message, that she didn't have to prove anything, didn't have to push herself to earn her place. The recognition made her throat tight in a way that had nothing to do with the heat she'd survived. The morning passed quietly. Mara finished her breakfast and helped Dottie with the dishes, learning the kitchen's geography and the older woman's exacting standards. Everything had its place, and everything was returned to that place immediately after use. The floor was swept twice daily. The stove was cleaned after every meal. The pantry was organized with military precision. "I won't have chaos in my kitchen," Dottie said, showing Mara where the clean towels were kept. "Chaos in the kitchen means chaos everywhere else. A well-run house starts here." By mid-morning, the heat had settled over the ranch like a wool blanket. Mara sat on the porch in the shade, watching the men work. True to Beckett's word, they acknowledged her presence with nods but kept their distance, focusing on the work of moving cattle from the holding pen into the main corral. Isaiah worked the gate, his movements economical and precise. Beckett was in the corral itself, on foot, guiding the yearlings with subtle shifts of his body that spoke of years of experience. The cattle responded to him like he was speaking a language they understood, moving where he wanted them to move, calming when his presence settled near them. "He's got a gift with animals," a voice said beside her. Mara startled, turning to find a boy perhaps a year or two older than her sitting on the porch rail. He was thin and sun-browned, with dark hair that stuck up in all directions and eyes that were too old for his face. "I'm Sam," he said. "Sam Prescott. I work in the barn mostly, mucking stalls, feeding horses, fixing tack. Mr. Hale hired me on 3 months ago." "Mara," she said, studying him. There was something guarded in the way he held himself, like he expected trouble even in moments of calm. "I know," Sam said. "Dottie told me about you, said Mr. Hale found you half dead on the trail." "That's about right," Mara said carefully. Sam nodded slowly. "He's good at finding people who need finding. Found me in town, sleeping behind the feed store. My pa got arrested for stealing horses. Not the first time, probably won't be the last. Nobody wanted anything to do with me after that. Prescott names poison around here." "But Mr. Hale hired you anyway," Mara said. "Yeah." Sam picked at a splinter in the porch rail. "Said what my pa did wasn't my fault, and he judged people on their own merits, not their family's mistakes. Give me work, a place in the bunkhouse, 3 meals a day. All I had to do was work honest and stay out of trouble." "Have you?" Mara asked. "Stayed out of trouble?" Sam's grin was crooked. "Mostly. I got into it with Martin Webb once. He said something about my pa and I took a swing at him. Mr. Hale made us both muck out the entire barn as punishment, then sat us down and explained that letting other people's words make me stupid was about the dumbest thing I could do. Said if I was going to prove I was better than my pa, I had to actually be better, not just talk about it." "Was he right?" Mara asked. "Yeah," Sam admitted. "Doesn't make it easier when people look at you like you're going to steal something just because of your last name. But Mr. Hale was right. I can't control what people think. I can only control what I do." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the work continue below. The sun climbed higher and the heat pressed down with relentless force. But there was something soothing about the rhythm of it, the low calls of the men, the movement of the cattle, the dust rising in golden clouds that caught the light. "Why are you telling me all this?" Mara asked eventually. Sam shrugged. "Because you're new, and you're probably wondering if this place is real or if it's going to turn bad like everywhere else. I figured you should know. It's real. Mr. Hale's the real thing. So's Dottie. So's Isaiah. They say what they mean, and they mean what they say. That's rarer than you'd think." "I know how rare it is," Mara said softly. "Then you know you're lucky," Sam said, hopping down from the rail. "I got to get back to work before Dottie comes looking for me with a broom. But if you need anything, someone to show you around, someone to talk to who gets what it's like to not fit anywhere, I'm around." He loped off toward the barn with the loose-limbed ease of youth, leaving Mara alone with her thoughts. She watched Beckett work with the cattle, watched Isaiah coordinate the hands, watched the smooth operation of a ranch that ran on mutual respect and clear expectations. It looked like stability. It looked like something she could trust. But Mara had learned that looking like something and being something were often very different things. She'd have to wait and see which this was. The answer started coming 3 days later, when the first child arrived. Mara was helping Dottie snap beans on the back porch when Isaiah rode in with a wagon. In the back, wrapped in a blanket despite the heat, were two children, a boy maybe 14 and a girl no more than 6. The boy's face was set in hard lines, his arm around the little girl in a grip that suggested he'd fight anyone who tried to separate them. Beckett emerged from the barn, his expression shifting from curiosity to something harder when he saw the children. He exchanged a few quiet words with Isaiah, too low for Mara to hear, then approached the wagon with his hands visible and his movements slow. "I'm Beckett Hale," he said to the boy. "This is my ranch. Isaiah says you two need help." The boy's jaw tightened. "We don't need charity." "Good," Beckett said. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering work, food, and a safe place to sleep. What you do with that offer is your choice." "What kind of work?" the boy asked suspiciously. "The honest kind," Beckett said. "Age-appropriate, paid fair, with nobody working more hours than their body can handle. You look strong enough for ranch work. Your sister looks young enough for school, which starts up again in September." "She stays with me," the boy said fiercely. "Wouldn't dream of separating you," Beckett said. "But I need to know your names and where you came from before I can help. Can you give me that much?" The boy hesitated, then seemed to decide Beckett was worth the risk. "Jace Whitmore. This is my sister Rosie. Our parents died of cholera last month. Aunt took us in, but her husband—" He stopped, his face going dark. "He shouldn't be around kids. We left." Beckett's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went cold and sharp. "Did he hurt either of you?" "Tried," Jace said flatly. "I made sure he didn't get the chance, but we can't go back." "No," Beckett agreed. "You can't." He turned toward the house. "Dottie, we've got company." Dottie appeared in the doorway, took one look at the children, and her whole demeanor shifted into something briskly efficient. "Bring them inside. They look half-starved." What followed was organized chaos. Dottie swept the children into the kitchen while Beckett and Isaiah conferred in low voices on the porch. Mara helped Dottie prepare food and draw water for washing, watching as Jace slowly relaxed his guard enough to let his sister eat. Rosie was tiny for 6, with blonde hair that hadn't been brushed in days and eyes that darted nervously at every sound. She ate mechanically, without joy, like food was just fuel and nothing more. "It's all right," Dottie said gently, setting milk in front of her. "Nobody's going to take your food away. Eat slow, or you'll make yourself sick." "She won't talk," Jace said quietly. Not since we left." "That's all right, too," Dottie said. "She'll talk when she's ready. Until then, we'll make sure she knows she's safe." Beckett came in through the back door, his hat in his hands. "Jace, I need you to tell me your aunt and uncle's names and where they live. I'm going to send word to the law in their county about what happened. What your uncle tried, that's not something I'm letting slide." Jace's face went white. "They'll send us back." "No," Beckett said firmly. "They won't. I'll make sure of that. But that man needs to answer for what he did, and your aunt needs to know you're safe. Can you trust me enough to handle this the right way?" It was the same question he'd asked Mara in different words, the same test of faith. Jace looked at his sister, then back at Beckett. "Harlan and Vera Mitchell. They've got a homestead outside Forsyth. Uncle Harlan's the one who shouldn't be around kids." Beckett nodded slowly. "All right, I'll write to the sheriff in Forsyth tonight. In the meantime, you two are staying here. Jace, if you're willing to work, I can use help in the barn and with fence repair. It's hot work, but not dangerous. Rosie, you'll stay with Dottie during the day until you're settled enough for other arrangements. Sound fair?" "Why are you doing this?" Jace asked, the same question Mara had asked, with the same underlying suspicion. "Because you need help, and I can provide it," Beckett said, his answer identical to the one he'd given her. "That's reason enough." That night, Mara helped Dottie make up rooms for the new arrivals. Jace in the bunkhouse with Sam and the other young hands, Rosie in a small room down the hall from Mara's. The little girl clung to her brother until Dottie gently explained that the bunkhouse was no place for a child her age, but that Jace could visit every morning before work and every evening after. It was Mara who finally coaxed Rosie into letting go. She knelt down to the little girl's level and said quietly, "I was scared too when I got here, but Mr. Hale keeps his promises. If he says Jace will come see you in the morning, he will. And I'm right down the hall if you need anything in the night." Rosie looked at her with those 2 old eyes, then slowly released her grip on Jace's hand. Over the next week, the ranch adjusted to accommodate its new residents. Jace threw himself into work with the intensity of someone trying to prove his worth, and Beckett had to physically stop him from working past dark. Rosie shadowed Dottie silently, watching everything with careful attention but speaking to no one. Mara found herself becoming something unexpected, a bridge between the adults and the silent little girl. She'd sit with Rosie on the porch in the evenings, not trying to force conversation, just being present in the way she wished someone had been present for her. Sometimes Sam would join them, telling rambling stories about the horses or the men or things he'd seen in town, filling the silence with words that expected nothing in return. 2 weeks after Rosie arrived, Mara woke in the middle of the night to find the little girl standing in her doorway, tears streaming down her face. She'd had a nightmare, something about her uncle and locked doors and not being able to find Jace. Mara sat up and held out her hand. "You're safe here," she said softly. "Nobody locks doors. Jace is in the bunkhouse sleeping. Come sit with me until you feel better." Rosie climbed onto the bed and curled against Mara's side, and for the first time since arriving, she spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, rusty from disuse. "I was scared he'd hurt Jace," she said. "When we ran. I was scared Uncle Harlan would catch us and hurt Jace for taking me away." "But he didn't," Mara said, stroking the little girl's hair. "Jace kept you safe. And now Mr. Hale's keeping both of you safe. That's what happens here. People protect each other." "Like you?" Rosie asked. "Like me," Mara confirmed. They sat together until Rosie fell asleep, and Mara carried her back to her own bed, tucking her in with the kind of care she remembered from her mother. When she turned to leave, she found Beckett standing in the hallway, watching with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're good with her," he said quietly. "I remember what it was like," Mara said simply. "Being that scared." Beckett nodded slowly. "Your 2 weeks are up tomorrow," he said. "I meant to talk to you about it earlier, but things got complicated with Jace and Rosie arriving. Have you decided what you want to do?" Mara looked back at Rosie's sleeping form, then at Beckett. "I want to stay," she said. "If the offer's still open." Something that might have been relief crossed Beckett's face. "It is. We'll make it official, talk to the church, get the paperwork sorted. You'll have a proper place here, not just a temporary refuge." "Thank you," Mara said. "Don't thank me yet," Beckett said, but there was warmth in his voice. "Dottie's about to put you to work properly, and she's a harder taskmaster than any ranch boss I've ever met." He was right about that. The next morning, Dottie laid out Mara's responsibilities, helping with meals, laundry once a week, keeping the common areas clean, and most importantly, helping with Rosie and any other children who might need care. It was real work, steady and demanding, but it came with the security of knowing she'd earned her place rather than being kept out of pity. The rhythm of the ranch became Mara's rhythm. She learned to read the men's needs before they asked: coffee in the morning, water brought out to the fields at midday, simple medical care for minor injuries. She learned Dottie's recipes and the exact way to fold sheets so they fit in the linen closet. She learned which tasks Rosie could help with and which were better done alone. And slowly, carefully, she learned that Beckett Hale meant what he said. When he promised Jace could visit Rosie every morning and evening, he made sure work schedules accommodated it. When he said the men wouldn't bother Mara, he enforced it with swift consequence. Martin Webb made one comment about her being easy on the eyes and found himself assigned to the worst jobs on the ranch for a week. When he told Rosie she was safe, he personally checked every lock on every door to make sure she could open them from inside. His word was as solid as the mountains on the horizon. 3 weeks after Mara had officially decided to stay, a writer came from town with news that made Beckett's face go hard. Harlan Mitchell had been arrested on charges brought by his own wife, who'd finally found the courage to speak up after learning her niece and nephew were safe. There would be a trial, but the evidence was damning enough that conviction seemed certain. Beckett called Jace into his office that evening and told him quietly. The boy's shoulders, which had been tense since arriving, finally relaxed. "He can't come after us now," Jace said, and it wasn't a question. "No," Beckett confirmed. "He can't. You and Rosie are safe. Legal safe, not just temporary safe." That night, for the first time since arriving, Rosie laughed. A small sound that came when Sam was telling an elaborate story about a horse that had stolen his hat. It was brief, quickly stifled like she wasn't sure laughter was allowed, but it was real. Mara caught Beckett's eye across the kitchen and saw something in his expression that looked almost like hope. Like maybe he was starting to believe that the broken pieces of his life could be assembled into something whole again, even if it looked nothing like what he'd lost. The ranch was becoming more than just a place that rescued the desperate. It was becoming a home. And that, Mara was learning, was the most dangerous and wonderful thing she could possibly trust in. The home they were building didn't go unnoticed. By late September, when the heat finally broke and the first cool winds swept down from the mountains, word had spread through the valley about what was happening at the Hale Ranch. Some of the talk was admiring, Beckett Hale taking in orphans, giving desperate children a second chance. But some of it carried an edge of suspicion that Mara recognized from experience. People who had too little always made those who had plenty uncomfortable. The trouble arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of Gideon Crowley. Mara was in the garden with Rosie, showing her how to tell when squash was ready for harvest, when she heard the horse approach. She looked up to see a man dismounting near the main house, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in clothes too fine for ranch work, with silver hair and a face that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. Beckett emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his work pants, his expression neutral, but his posture alert. Isaiah appeared from the corral, moving to stand a few feet behind Beckett in silent support. The positioning wasn't accidental. "Crowley," Beckett said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Wasn't expecting you." "That's because I don't make social calls to people I don't consider friends," Crowley said, his voice smooth and educated in a way that immediately set Mara on edge. Men with voices like that usually meant trouble. "I'm here on behalf of several concerned citizens in the valley." "Concerned about what?" Beckett's tone remained even, but Mara could see the tension in his shoulders. "About the children you've been collecting," Crowley said, looking around the property with undisguised assessment. "4 now, from what I hear. All conveniently orphaned or abandoned, all conveniently dependent on your generosity." "Is there a point to this visit?" Beckett asked. "Or did you ride all the way out here just to count my household?" Crowley's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The point, Hale, is that people are starting to wonder about your motives. A wealthy rancher suddenly taking in vulnerable children, keeping them isolated out here, putting them to work on his property. It raises questions about exploitation, about whether these children are truly being cared for or being used as cheap labor." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Mara felt Rosie press closer to her side, the little girl's hand finding hers with the instinct of someone who recognized danger even when she didn't fully understand it. Beckett's voice when he spoke was cold enough to frost. "You want to make that accusation clearly, Crowley, or you want to keep dancing around it like a coward?" "I'm not accusing anything," Crowley said smoothly. "I'm simply expressing concerns that have been raised by respectable people in this valley. People who wonder if the territorial authorities might want to investigate the situation here. Make sure these children are being properly treated, properly educated, properly what?" Like Beckett cut in. "Properly fed? They eat the same food I do. Properly housed? They sleep in warm beds with clean sheets. Properly worked? The only child here old enough for real ranch work is Jace Whitmore, and he works half the hours of a regular hand at the same pay rate. You want to investigate something, Crowley? Investigate the bastards who abandoned these kids in the first place." "Such passion," Crowley observed. "One might almost think you had a personal stake in this beyond simple Christian charity. But then, we both know this isn't about charity, is it? This is about assuaging your own guilt, filling the hole left by your wife and daughter with substitutes who can't say no because they have nowhere else to go." Isaiah moved forward, his hand dropping to his hip where Mara knew he kept a knife for cutting rope, but Beckett held up a hand to stop him. When Beckett spoke again, his voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made even Crowley take a step back. "You don't know a damn thing about my wife or my daughter," Beckett said. "And you sure as hell don't know anything about why I'm doing this. But since you seem so concerned about the welfare of these children, how about we settle this right now? You want an investigation? Fine. Bring whoever you want out here. Territorial authorities, the church, the whole damn town if that's what it takes. Let them see how these kids are living. Let them talk to the children themselves. Then we'll see who's exploiting who. Crowley's smile tightened. Careful what you offer, Hale. An official investigation might uncover things you'd rather keep private. The law takes a dim view of men who use children for their own purposes, no matter how noble they pretend those purposes are. Then it's a good thing I've got nothing to hide, Beckett said. But what about you, Crowley? What's your stake in this? Because a man doesn't ride out here making accusations unless he's got skin in the game. So what is it? You looking to make a name for yourself by taking down the wealthy rancher? Or is this about the water rights dispute we had last spring that didn't go your way? For the first time, genuine anger flashed across Crowley's face. This has nothing to do with water rights. Then what's it about? Beckett pressed. Because from where I'm standing, this looks like a man trying to cause trouble for the sake of causing trouble. And I don't take kindly to people making my children targets just to settle a score. Your children? Crowley seized on the words. They're not your children, Hale. They're strays you picked up and dressed in borrowed clothes. And when the novelty wears off, when they become too expensive or too difficult, what happens then? You gonna throw them back like the unwanted things they are? The words landed like physical blows. Mara felt them in her chest, in the place where she kept all her fears about what would happen when Beckett decided she wasn't worth the trouble anymore. Beside her, Rosie had gone rigid. But before Beckett could respond, before Isaiah could do something that would probably get him arrested, Mara heard herself speak. He won't! Her voice was too loud in the sudden silence. Every head turned toward her, and for a moment she wanted to take the words back, to retreat into the safety of invisibility. But Rosie's hand was gripping hers tight enough to hurt, and Sam had appeared from the barn with Jace right behind him, and they were all looking at her like she'd said something important. So she stepped forward, pulling Rosie with her, and kept talking even though her heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. He won't throw us away, she said again, louder this time. Because Mr. Hale keeps his promises. He promised me I'd be safe here, and I am. He promised Jace that his sister wouldn't be separated from him, and she hasn't been. He promised Rosie that no one would hurt her, and no one has. Those aren't empty words. They're the truth. Crowley turned his attention to her fully, and she saw calculation in his eyes. And you are? Mara Caldwell, she said, lifting her chin. I was the first one Mr. Hale brought here. He found me dying on the cattle trail where I'd been abandoned. He saved my life and gave me a home when he didn't have to, when it would have been easier to leave me or drop me at the nearest mission. He did it because it was right, not because he wanted something from me. A touching story, Crowley said. But children are easily manipulated, easily convinced that their circumstances are better than they are. You say you're safe here, but do you even know what safety looks like? Or has Hale convinced you that gratitude and dependency are the same thing? The words were meant to shake her, to make her doubt. And part of her, the part that had learned not to trust, not to hope, wanted to let them in. But then she felt Rosie's hand in hers, heard Sam's quiet breathing behind her, saw the way Beckett was looking at her, not with anger for speaking up, but with something that looked almost like pride. I know the difference, Mara said quietly. I know what it feels like to be used, to be kept around only as long as you're useful and thrown away the moment you become inconvenient. That's not what this is. Mr. Hale doesn't need us to work his ranch. He's got hired hands for that. He doesn't need us to make him look good. Half the valley thinks he's crazy for taking us in. He gives us a home because we need one and he can provide it. That's not manipulation. That's just decency. Decency, Crowley repeated, like the word tasted bad. Or the appearance of decency, which amounts to the same thing for a man trying to rebuild his reputation after driving his wife to... Finish that sentence, Beckett said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. And I will remove you from my property by force. My wife died of scarlet fever. That's a fact, documented by Doc Pritchard and witnessed by half the valley. Whatever lie you're about to tell, I suggest you swallow it before I make you. Crowley held his ground, but something in his posture shifted. I'm simply pointing out that a man with your history might have reasons for surrounding himself with vulnerable children that have nothing to do with altruism. The territorial authorities will want to examine those reasons closely. Then let them come, Beckett said flatly. Like I said, I've got nothing to hide. But you show up here again making accusations without evidence, and I'll have Isaiah escort you off the property at gunpoint. That clear enough for you? For a long moment, Crowley didn't move. Then he smiled that cold smile again and remounted his horse with practiced ease. "I'll be back, Hale, with the sheriff and a representative from the territorial office. We'll see how well your little charity operation holds up under actual scrutiny. And when it falls apart, because operations like this always fall apart, those children will learn what happens when you put your faith in broken men who can't save themselves, let alone anyone else." He rode out without waiting for a response, leaving behind a silence heavy with implications. Beckett stood watching until Crowley disappeared down the road, then turned to find all of them gathered in the yard. Mara and Rosie, Sam and Jace, Isaiah, and several of the hands who'd emerged from various corners of the ranch. His face was drawn, older looking than it had been an hour ago. "All right," he said quietly. "Everyone back to work. We've got a ranch to run, and standing around worrying isn't going to change anything." "Boss," Isaiah said, his voice careful, "we need to talk about what just happened." "Later," Beckett said. "Right now, I need to think." He walked toward the house with the measured stride of a man carrying weight he didn't want others to see. Dottie met him at the door, her expression grim. She'd clearly heard everything from inside. The ranch returned to its routines, but the ease that had been building over the past weeks was gone, replaced by an undercurrent of tension that colored everything. Jace worked with savage focus, like he could somehow prove their worth through sheer labor. Sam grew quiet and withdrawn, the old wariness returning to his eyes. Even Rosie, who'd been slowly coming out of her shell, retreated back into silence. That evening, Beckett called them all together in the main house. The children, Dottie, Isaiah, and the senior hands. He stood by the fireplace, his face serious but not defeated. "I want you all to hear this directly from me," he said. "Gideon Crowley is going to make good on his threat. He's going to bring the territorial authorities here to investigate how we operate. That means people are going to come asking questions, looking through the property, talking to each of you. And I need you to understand something important. You tell them the truth. All of it. The good and the bad. If there's something about this place that makes you uncomfortable, something that isn't right, you say so. I'm not asking you to lie for me." "But what if they don't believe the truth?" Jace asked, his voice tight. "What if they decide to split us up anyway?" "Then we'll fight it," Beckett said simply. "Legal, proper, through the courts if we have to. But I won't fight it by teaching you to lie or by hiding what we've built here. This ranch stands on honesty, or it doesn't stand at all." "Why's Mr. Crowley doing this?" Mara asked. "What does he get out of causing trouble?" Isaiah answered before Beckett could. "Crowley's been trying to buy this property for years, wants the water access and the grazing land. Boss keeps refusing to sell, so Crowley looks for other ways to get what he wants. Making the ranch look bad, making the boss look unfit. It's all tactics to force a sale." "It's more than that," Beckett said quietly. "Crowley and I have history. His daughter, she and my daughter were friends before. When Sarah died, Crowley blamed me. Said I should have called the doctor sooner, should have gotten her to better treatment. He wasn't entirely wrong. I did wait too long, thinking it was just a fever that would break. By the time Doc Pritchard got there, it was too late. Crowley's carried that grudge ever since, and now he sees this, sees me trying to build something good with other people's children, and it eats at him." The admission hung in the air. It was the first time Beckett had spoken openly about his daughter's death, the first time he'd acknowledged the guilt that Crowley had weaponized against him. "That wasn't your fault," Dottie said firmly. "Scarlet fever took half the valley's children that year. Sarah wasn't the first, and she wasn't the last. You did everything you could." "I know that now," Beckett said. "Took me years to accept it, but I know it. Doesn't mean Crowley's wrong about me trying to fill a hole, though. He's right about that part. I am trying to make something good out of something terrible. But that doesn't make what we're doing here wrong. It just makes it personal." "So what do we do?" Sam asked. "We prepare," Beckett said. "We make sure this place is beyond reproach. Dottie, I need you to go through all the household records, food purchases, clothing expenses, medical bills, everything documented and accounted for. Isaiah, I need work logs showing hours and wages for everyone old enough to work. And I need to talk to Doc Pritchard about writing up health reports for all the children, showing they're well-fed and properly cared for." "You're building a defense," Isaiah said. I'm building proof, Beckett corrected. Proof that these children are better off here than anywhere else they could be. Proof that this ranch operates with integrity. Proof that Crowley's accusations are exactly what they are. Lies meant to destroy something good because he can't stand seeing it exist. Over the next 2 weeks, the ranch transformed into something that looked more like a military operation than a home. Every corner was scrubbed, every record meticulously organized, every child drilled on what to expect when the authorities arrived. Beckett brought in a lawyer from Helena, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Ross, who reviewed everything with ruthless efficiency and declared the ranch's operations not just adequate, but exemplary. If anything, she told Beckett in Mara's hearing, you're being too generous. You're paying Jace more than standard wages for his age, feeding these children better than most families can afford to feed their own, and investing in their education beyond what's legally required. Crowley doesn't have a case. He's got spite and speculation, neither of which will hold up under scrutiny. Then why does it feel like we're heading for a fight? Beckett asked. Because spite is dangerous, Margaret said bluntly. Men like Crowley don't need facts. They just need to plant enough doubt that people start asking questions. Your job is to make those questions irrelevant by showing everyone exactly what this place is. The authorities arrived on a Wednesday morning in early October, when the cottonwood leaves had turned gold and the air carried the first real bite of autumn. Sheriff Tom Brennan came with a territorial representative named Howard Nash and a woman from the church named Sister Catherine, who was there to assess the children's welfare. Beckett met them at the gate, Dottie and Margaret Ross flanking him, presenting a united front that spoke of preparation and confidence. Mara watched from the porch with the other children, her stomach twisted in knots despite Margaret's assurances that everything would be fine. Sheriff, Mr. Nash, Sister Catherine, Beckett said, shaking hands with each of them. Welcome to Hale Ranch. I understand you're here to investigate the welfare of the children in my care. I'm prepared to cooperate fully with that investigation. We appreciate that, Mr. Hale, Nash said. He was younger than Mara expected, with intelligent eyes and a manner that suggested he took his responsibilities seriously. We'll need to tour the facilities, review your records, and speak with the children privately. Of course, Beckett said. Dottie will show you the house and the children's quarters. Margaret has all the financial and operational records prepared for your review, and the children have been told to answer your questions honestly. We've got nothing to hide. What followed was the longest day Mara could remember since the day she'd been thrown from the wagon. She watched strangers walk through rooms that had become hers, examining beds and clothes and the books Beckett had bought for their education. She answered questions about her daily routine, her relationship with Beckett and Dottie, whether she felt safe, whether she was forced to work, whether anyone had ever hurt her or made her uncomfortable. She told the truth, all of it, even the parts that made her voice shake, about being abandoned, about the fear she'd carried that first week, about slowly learning to trust that Beckett's promises were real. Sister Catherine listened with a face that gave nothing away, taking notes in a small leather book. Rosie's interview was harder. The little girl had only just started talking again regularly, and the presence of strangers threatened to send her back into silence. But when Sister Catherine asked if she felt safe at the ranch, Rosie nodded firmly. And when asked if she wanted to stay, she looked directly at the woman and said in her small, clear voice, "Mr. Hale keeps the bad people away. I want to stay." Jace's interview was the most intense. Nash questioned him extensively about his work, the hours, the type of labor, whether he felt exploited or coerced. Jace answered each question with increasing frustration, finally saying, "Mr. Hale gave me and my sister a home when our own family's home wasn't safe. He pays me fair, works beside me instead of just giving orders, and makes sure I still have time to be 14 instead of just a worker. If that's exploitation, then I don't understand what that word means." By late afternoon, the investigators had seen everything, questioned everyone, and reviewed every document Margaret had prepared. They gathered in Beckett's office for a private conference, while the household waited in tense silence. Mara sat on the porch with Sam and Rosie, watching the office window for any sign of what was happening inside. Jace paced the yard like a caged animal. Dottie stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, her face set in grim determination. Isaiah and the hands hovered near the barn, ready to intervene if things went wrong in ways that couldn't be fixed with words. When the office door finally opened, Beckett emerged first, his expression carefully neutral. The investigators followed, Nash tucking papers into a leather case, while Sister Catherine conferred quietly with Sheriff Brennan. Nash stepped forward, addressing not just Beckett, but the entire assembled household. Mr. Hale, after thorough investigation, we found no evidence of exploitation, abuse, or improper treatment of the children in your care. The conditions here exceed standards for both private homes and institutional facilities. The children are well fed, properly housed, adequately educated, and by their own testimony, content with their circumstances. Relief swept through Mara so powerfully she felt dizzy with it. Beside her, Sam let out a breath he'd been holding, and Rosie's hand found hers with desperate tightness. However, Nash continued, and the relief stuttered, we do have concerns about the informal nature of these arrangements. None of these children have been formally placed in your custody through legal channels. They're here by circumstance rather than official sanction. Sister Catherine has recommended that if you intend to continue providing care for these children, you should pursue proper legal guardianship. I'll start the paperwork tomorrow, Beckett said immediately. See that you do, Nash said. He glanced toward where Mara and the others sat. For what it's worth, Mr. Hale, what you're doing here is admirable. These children are lucky to have found their way to you. I'm the lucky one, Beckett said quietly. After the investigators left, the ranch erupted in a release of tension that felt almost like celebration. Dottie started making plans for a special supper. Isaiah broke out the good whiskey for the hands, and the children's laughter rang out across the property for the first time in weeks. But Beckett didn't join in. He stood apart, watching them all with an expression Mara couldn't quite read. Satisfaction mixed with something deeper, something that looked almost like wonder. She approached him carefully, aware that she was crossing some invisible line but unable to stop herself. Mr. Hale, are you all right? He looked down at her, and for a moment she saw past the rancher, past the boss, past the broken man trying to build something from his grief. She saw someone who'd been alone for a very long time, finally allowing himself to believe he might not have to be alone anymore. Yeah, Mara, he said softly. I think I am. That night marked a turning point that nobody spoke about directly, but everyone felt. The ranch stopped pretending to be temporary. Beckett filed the guardianship papers the next morning, sitting in Margaret Ross's office, in town, for 3 hours while she explained exactly what legal custody would mean, rights and responsibilities that extended far beyond the informal care he'd been providing. When he returned, he gathered the children in the kitchen and told them plainly what he'd done. I've started the legal process to become your guardian, he said, looking at each of them in turn. That means this isn't just a place you're staying until something better comes along. This is your home, for as long as you want it to be. And if anyone ever tries to take you away again, they'll have to go through the law and through me to do it. Rosie climbed into his lap without hesitation, something she'd never done before, and Beckett's arms came around her automatically, like he'd been waiting for permission to hold her. Jace's eyes went suspiciously bright, and he turned away quickly, but not before Mara saw him wipe at his face. Sam just nodded, like this confirmed something he'd already known but needed to hear said out loud. Mara felt something shift in her chest, the last small piece of armor she'd been carrying finally falling away. She'd spent so long protecting herself from hoping for permanence that actually having it felt strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. But the peace didn't last long. 3 days after the investigators left, Gideon Crowley made his second move. He didn't come to the ranch this time. Instead, he went to town and started talking to shopkeepers and church ladies, to ranch hands and farmers who gathered at the mercantile on Saturday mornings. He didn't make direct accusations. He'd learned that lesson. But he asked questions designed to plant doubt. Why would a wealthy bachelor suddenly collect children? What did Beckett Hale really want with those kids? Wasn't it convenient that the territorial investigation had found nothing wrong, almost like it had been staged? The talk spread like brushfire in dry season. Mara heard about it first from Doc Pritchard, who stopped by the ranch under the pretense of checking on Rosie, but really came to warn Beckett about what was being said in town. People are starting to believe him, Doc said bluntly, accepting coffee from Dottie, but leaving it untouched on the table. Not everyone, mind you, but enough. Crowley's got a way of making poison sound like concern, and folks who don't know you well enough are listening. What exactly is he saying? Beckett asked, his voice dangerously calm. That you're using those children to make yourself look respectable. That you're trying to buy redemption for letting your own daughter die. That the territorial investigation was a whitewash because you've got money and influence. Doc paused, his weathered face troubled. He's also saying that children raised in isolation on a ranch, without proper schooling or socialization, are being set up to fail. That you're creating a private kingdom out here where you control everything and answer to no one. Beckett's jaw tightened. The children are getting proper schooling. Dottie's been teaching them daily, and we're planning to send them to the town school when it opens next month. I know that, Doc said, but Crowley's convinced people that you'll find excuses to keep them out here, that you can't stand the idea of giving up control over them. He's painting you as either a tyrant or a fool, and either way unfit to have custody of vulnerable children. So what does he want? Dottie demanded. What's his endgame here? Same as it's always been, Doc said. He wants this ranch, wants it bad enough that he's willing to destroy Beckett's reputation and traumatize 4 children to get it. He figures if he can make the situation here look bad enough, the territorial office will remove the children, Beckett will be discredited, and the ranch will lose its value. Then Crowley can buy it for a fraction of what it's worth. Over my dead body, Beckett said quietly. That might be what it takes, Doc said. Crowley's not the type to give up just because he lost the first round. He'll keep pushing until something breaks. What broke first was Mara's temper. She was in town with Dottie the following Saturday, helping carry supplies from the mercantile to the wagon, when she heard 2 women talking near the fabric counter. They didn't see her behind the shelves of canned goods, didn't lower their voices because they had no idea one of those poor children from the Hale place was within earshot. It's unnatural, one of them was saying. A man living alone with 4 children who aren't his? There's something wrong about it, no matter how you paint it. I heard he works them like servants, the other woman replied. That the little girl, the Whitmore child, does all the cooking and cleaning while Hale sits back and watches. Mara's vision went red at the edges. She stepped around the shelf before she could think better of it, her voice carrying across the store with more force than she knew she possessed. That's a lie, she said flatly. Every word of it is a lie, and you should be ashamed for spreading it. Both women turned, their faces registering shock and then something that looked almost like guilt. But the taller one recovered quickly, her expression hardening. Young lady, you shouldn't speak to your elders that way. And you shouldn't speak lies about people who've shown you nothing but decency, Mara shot back. Mr. Hale doesn't work us like servants. He doesn't sit back and watch. He works harder than anyone on that ranch. And the only reason Rosie, that's the Whitmore child's name, does any cooking is because she wants to learn and Dottie's teaching her. We get 3 good meals a day, clean beds, new clothes when we need them, and an education. We're safer and better cared for than half the children in this valley who live with their own blood families. So before you stand here judging a good man based on gossip from a bitter one, maybe you should come see for yourself what you're condemning. The silence in the mercantile was absolute. Every customer, every clerk stood frozen, staring at the 11-year-old girl who just dressed down 2 of the town's most prominent church ladies. Dottie appeared from the back room, took one look at the situation, and her face went carefully neutral. Mara, help me with these flour sacks. But the damage was done, and Mara knew it. She'd just confirmed everything Crowley had been saying about children from the ranch being strange, isolated, unable to interact properly with normal society. She'd made things worse. The ride back to the ranch was silent. Dottie didn't scold her, which somehow felt worse than anger would have. When they arrived, Beckett was in the yard working with one of the young horses. He took one look at Dottie's face and Mara's hunched shoulders and set down his rope. What happened? Dottie explained briefly while Mara stood miserably beside the wagon, waiting for the inevitable consequences. When Dottie finished, Beckett was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked over to Mara and crouched down so they were eye level. Did you mean what you said to those women? He asked. Mara nodded, not trusting her voice. All of it. About being safe here? About being well cared for? Yes, sir, Mara whispered. Every word. Then you didn't do anything wrong, Beckett said simply. Standing up for the truth isn't something to apologize for. Those women were spreading lies and you called them on it. That took courage. But I made things worse, Mara said, the words tumbling out now. I proved what Mr. Crowley's been saying, that we're different, that we don't fit in, that keeping us out here is making us strange. You proved that you're loyal and brave and unwilling to let good people be slandered, Beckett interrupted. That's not strange. That's admirable. And if the town can't see the difference, that's their failing, not yours. But Mara could see the worry in his eyes, the calculation happening behind them. He knew as well as she did that her outburst would be all over town by sundown, twisted and reshaped to fit whatever narrative people wanted to believe. The consequences came faster than expected. On Monday, Margaret Ross arrived at the ranch with news that made Beckett's face go gray. Crowley had filed a formal complaint with the territorial court, claiming that Beckett was psychologically damaging the children by isolating them from society, and that Mara's public confrontation was evidence of that damage. He's asking for a competency hearing, Margaret said, spreading papers across Beckett's desk. Wants the court to determine whether you're fit to have custody. If they rule against you, the children get removed and placed in institutional care until proper families can be found. Can he do that? Beckett asked. We just had an investigation. They found nothing wrong. That investigation was about abuse and exploitation, Margaret explained. This is different. This is about your psychological fitness as a guardian and your ability to prepare these children for life in normal society. Crowley's arguing that even if you're not abusing them, you're damaging them by creating an isolated bubble where they can't develop proper social skills. That's insane, Dottie said from the doorway. These children are more well-adjusted than half the brats in town. Maybe so, Margaret said, but Crowley's got witnesses willing to testify about the incident at the Mercantile. He's going to paint Mara as a child who's been taught to be confrontational and disrespectful, unable to function in polite society, because she's been raised in isolation by a man still grieving his own losses. Mara felt like she'd been punched. This was her fault. Her temper, her inability to just stay quiet, like she'd learned to do in all the homes before this one, had given Crowley exactly the ammunition he needed. When's the hearing? Beckett asked. 3 weeks, Margaret said, which gives us time to build a defense, but not much. We need to show that these children are thriving, not just surviving, that they're being prepared for independent lives, not turned into dependent shadows of your grief. Over the next 3 weeks, the ranch transformed again. But this time it wasn't about scrubbing floors or organizing records. It was about proving that the children were normal, well-adjusted, capable of functioning in the wider world. Beckett enrolled them in the town school, despite it being mid-semester. Every morning, he drove them in himself, staying to talk with the teacher, making sure they were integrating properly. Every afternoon, he picked them up and asked detailed questions about their day, their interactions, their struggles and successes. For Mara, school was a special kind of torture. The other children knew who she was, the girl from the Hale Ranch, the one who'd yelled at Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Whitfield in the Mercantile. Some were curious, asking her questions about life on the ranch, but others were cruel in the way children could be, parroting things they'd heard their parents say about Beckett being strange, about the ranch being unnatural, about Mara and the others being charity cases who didn't know their place. She endured it silently, remembering Beckett's words about proving them wrong through actions rather than arguments. She helped younger students with their reading, shared her lunch with a boy whose family was struggling, and worked twice as hard as anyone else to show she could keep up academically despite her unconventional education. Jace had it worse. At 14, he was older than most of the students and bore the weight of knowing that his behavior directly impacted Rosie's future. He absorbed taunts about being too dumb for his age, about doing ranch work because he couldn't handle real school. He came home with bruises from a fight he didn't start but refused to explain, taking Beckett's disappointed silence harder than any punishment. Only Rosie seemed to blossom. The structure of school, the presence of other children her age, brought her further out of her shell. She made a friend, a quiet girl named Emma, whose family owned the bakery, and came home chattering about lessons and recess and the games they played. For her sake alone, the ordeal seemed worth it. Sam stayed on the ranch, too young for the advanced classes and too old for the primary grades. He threw himself into work with Isaiah, learning skills that would make him valuable as a ranch hand in his own right. But Mara saw the way he watched them leave each morning, the loneliness in his eyes that spoke of feeling left behind. Through it all, Beckett held steady. He attended every school function, met with the teacher weekly, made himself visible in town in ways he'd avoided for years. He was building proof, Mara realized, Proof that he wasn't isolating the children, that he was actively integrating them into the community, that he wanted them to have full lives beyond the ranch's boundaries. But the cost was visible in the lines that deepened around his eyes, in the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was watching. He was forcing himself to be social, to be public, to expose himself and the children to judgment and scrutiny, because it was the only way to fight Crowley's accusations, and it was killing him by inches. The night before the hearing, Beckett called them all together one last time. They sat in the main room, Mara, Jace, Sam, and Rosie on the long sofa, Dottie in her usual chair, Isaiah standing by the fireplace. Beckett paced, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Tomorrow's going to be hard," he said finally. "They're going to ask you questions about living here, about me, about whether you feel like this is a real home or just a place you're stuck. And I need you to know, whatever you say, whatever you feel, it's all right. If any of you want to leave, if you think you'd be better off somewhere else, you can say so. I won't hold it against you." "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard you say," Jace said flatly. "And I've heard you try to explain cattle breeding." Despite everything, Beckett's mouth twitched. "I'm serious, Jace." "So am I," Jace said. "You think any of us want to leave? You think we'd be better off in some institution where they keep kids in rows like inventory? This place is home. He stopped, struggling with words. "You're the closest thing to a father any of us have got. If that court can't see that, they're blind." "They might see it and still rule against us," Beckett said quietly. "Crowley's good at making reasonable things sound sinister. He's going to argue that I'm replacing my daughter with Rosie, replacing my wife with Dottie, creating a fantasy family to avoid dealing with my grief. And the worst part is, he's not entirely wrong about the grief part." "But he's wrong about everything else," Mara said. "You're not replacing anyone. You're just helping people who need help. Same as you helped me when I was dying in the sun. Same as you helped Jace and Rosie when they ran from their uncle. That's not fantasy. That's just being a decent human being." "The law doesn't always recognize decency as a valid defense," Beckett said. "Sometimes following the rules matters more than doing the right thing." "Then we'll show them the rules don't apply here," Sam said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him, and he flushed but kept talking. "What I mean is, we'll show them that this place is better than the rules. That what you're doing works even if it doesn't fit in their neat little boxes of how families are supposed to look." "Out of the mouths of babes," Dottie murmured. "I'm not a babe," Sam protested. "I'm almost 13. "Old enough to be wise, then," Dottie said, and there was approval in her voice. Beckett stopped pacing and looked at each of them, really looked, like he was trying to memorize their faces. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, his voice rough, "I want you to know that having you here, all of you, has been the best thing that's happened to me since Sarah died. You didn't fix me. I'm still broken in ways that probably won't ever heal. But you made the broken parts bearable. You made this ranch feel like a home instead of a mausoleum. That's worth everything to me." Rosie slipped off the sofa and walked over to him, taking his hand. "You made us feel like we matter," she said in her small, clear voice. "Like we're not just leftovers nobody wanted. That's worth everything to us, too." Beckett knelt down and pulled her into a hug, and then somehow they were all there. Mara and Jace and Sam crowding in, Dottie's hand on Beckett's shoulder, Isaiah's quiet presence anchoring them all. It wasn't the tidy, picture-perfect family that society expected, but it was real, and it was theirs, and it was worth fighting for. The hearing took place in the territorial courthouse, an imposing stone building that smelled like old paper and furniture polish. Mara had never been inside a courtroom before, and the formality of it made her stomach clench with anxiety. The judge, a stern-faced man named Thurston Hayes, sat behind a massive desk, looking down at them with an expression that gave nothing away. Crowley sat at one table with his lawyer, looking confident in a way that made Mara's teeth ache. Beckett sat at another with Margaret Ross, his face composed but his hands gripping the armrests of his chair, hard enough that his knuckles showed white. The children sat in the gallery with Dottie, instructed to remain silent unless called to testify. Mara watched as Crowley's lawyer presented his case, painting a picture of a grief-stricken man collecting vulnerable children to fill a void in his life, isolating them from normal society, creating dependent relationships that served his emotional needs rather than the children's best interests. He called witnesses. Mrs. Patterson from the Mercantile testified about Mara's outburst, describing it as evidence of a child who'd been taught that she was special, above the normal rules of polite society. A teacher from town testified that while the Hale children were academically capable, they struggled with social integration, often clustering together rather than mixing with other students. Even Doc Pritchard, called as a supposedly neutral medical expert, had to admit under questioning that he'd seen signs of attachment disorder in Rosie and defensive behavior patterns in Mara that suggested past trauma not fully addressed. With each testimony, Mara felt their case slipping away. The truth was being twisted into something ugly, and she didn't know how to fight it. Then it was Margaret's turn. She called Isaiah first, who testified about the ranch's operations, the children's responsibilities, the care taken to ensure they were treated as children, not workers. She called the school teacher, who, under different questioning, admitted that the Hale children were making steady progress and that their academic performance exceeded many of their peers. She called Sister Catherine from the Territorial Investigation, who stated firmly that, in her professional opinion, the children were thriving under Beckett's care. Finally, she called the children themselves. Jace went first, answering questions with the blunt honesty that was his trademark. Yes, he worked on the ranch. No, he wasn't forced to. Yes, he'd prefer to be here than in an institution. No, Mr. Hale had never mistreated him. Yes, he considered this home. Sam was next, quiet but steady, explaining how Beckett had given him a chance when his own father's crimes had made him untouchable in the community. How he'd learned skills and self-respect in equal measure. How he'd finally stopped feeling like he had to apologize for existing. Then it was Mara's turn. She walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like water, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Margaret's questions were gentle, designed to let her tell her story in her own words. She explained about being abandoned, about nearly dying in the heat, about Beckett finding her and bringing her to the ranch. She described the weeks of recovery, the decision to stay, the slow process of learning to trust that this place was different from everywhere else she'd been. Then Crowley's lawyer stood up for cross-examination, and Mara understood why Beckett had looked so worried. "Miss Caldwell," he said, his voice oily with false sympathy, "you've described Mr. Hale as your rescuer. Would you say you feel indebted to him?" "I feel grateful," Mara said carefully. "Gratitude and debt are often confused by children," the lawyer said. "Tell me, if Mr. Hale asked you to lie for him, would you do it?" "He wouldn't ask me to lie," Mara said. "But if he did?" "I'd tell him no," Mara said firmly. "Mr. Hale taught me that honesty matters more than convenience. If he asked me to lie, he wouldn't be the man I think he is." The lawyer's smile tightened. "Very noble. But isn't it true that you confronted two respectable women in public, accusing them of lying about Mr. Hale? That doesn't sound like someone who values respect for others." "They were spreading lies," Mara said. "I do value respect, but I value truth more. And the truth is that Mr. Hale is a good man who's given me and the others a home when nobody else would. If standing up for that truth makes me disrespectful, then I'll be disrespectful. Even if it hurts Mr. Hale's case? Even if your outburst is being used as evidence that he's raising you improperly?" The question hit like a physical blow. Mara's throat closed up, and for a horrible moment she couldn't speak. Then she looked across the courtroom and found Beckett's eyes. He gave her the smallest nod, and somehow that was enough. "The truth is the truth," she said quietly, "whether it helps or hurts. Mr. Hale taught me that too." The lawyer tried a few more questions, but Mara held steady, and eventually he dismissed her. She walked back to her seat feeling wrung out and uncertain whether she'd helped or condemned them all. Rosie was called last. She walked to the stand with Emma from the bakery's hand in hers, a detail Margaret had clearly arranged. The judge allowed it, perhaps recognizing that a traumatized 6-year-old needed whatever comfort was available. Margaret's questions for Rosie were simple. "Do you feel safe at the ranch?" "Yes." "Do you miss your aunt?" "No." "Do you want to stay with Mr. Hale?" "Yes." "Why?" Rosie thought about it seriously, then said in her clear, small voice, "Because he keeps his promises, and because he makes Jace smile. Jace didn't smile for a long time before we came here. Now he smiles almost every day. The simplicity of it, the pure, uncomplicated truth of a child's observation, seemed to land harder than all the legal arguments and expert testimony combined. Even Judge Hayes' expression softened slightly. Crowley's lawyer declined to cross-examine her, perhaps recognizing that attacking a 6-year-old would win him no favors with the judge. When all the testimony was complete, Judge Hayes called for closing arguments. Crowley's lawyer stood and delivered a passionate speech about the importance of proper socialization, about children needing stable, traditional family structures, about the dangers of allowing grief-stricken men to use vulnerable children as emotional band-aids. Then Margaret stood. She didn't raise her voice or appeal to emotion. She simply laid out the facts: the children's improved health, their academic progress, the legal measures Beckett had taken to ensure proper custody, the expert testimony confirming they were thriving. She pointed out that nowhere in the law did it say families had to look traditional to be valid, that what mattered was the welfare of the children, and by every objective measure, these children were better off than they'd been before. Mr. Crowley wants you to rule based on what he thinks is proper, she concluded. I'm asking you to rule based on what actually works. And what works is this family, unconventional, imperfect, but real and functional, and full of people who care for each other. Don't destroy that because it doesn't fit someone's narrow definition of normal. Judge Hayes took less than an hour to deliberate. When he returned, his face was unreadable. He looked at Beckett, then at the children, then back at his notes. This court has reviewed all evidence and testimony, he said formally. While there are legitimate concerns about socialization and long-term stability, there is no evidence of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. The children appear healthy, educated, and by their own accounts, content with their current situation. Furthermore, Mr. Hale has demonstrated a willingness to address concerns by enrolling the children in public school and pursuing formal legal guardianship. Mara's heart hammered so hard she could barely hear over it. Therefore, Judge Hayes continued, this court finds in favor of Mr. Hale. The guardianship proceedings may continue, and the children shall remain in his custody pending completion of those proceedings. However, he looked directly at Beckett. This court will require quarterly reports on the children's welfare and progress. Any sign of isolation or improper treatment will result in immediate review. Am I understood? Yes, Your Honor, Beckett said, his voice rough with relief. Mr. Crowley, the judge said, turning his attention to where Crowley sat rigid with fury. Any further complaints will need to be accompanied by actual evidence, not speculation and gossip. This court has better things to do than referee personal vendettas. If I see you in here again on this matter without substantial cause, I'll hold you in contempt. Clear? Crowley's jaw worked, but he managed a curt nod. This hearing is adjourned, Judge Hayes declared, and brought his gavel down with a crack that sounded like freedom. The courtroom erupted in a chaos of relief and anger. Crowley shoved back from his table so violently his chair toppled, stalking out without a word to anyone. His lawyer gathered papers with tight-lipped efficiency, clearly displeased with the outcome, but professional enough not to show it overtly. In the gallery, Dottie had her arms around Rosie and was crying openly, something Mara had never seen her do. Isaiah's hand gripped Beckett's shoulder hard enough to leave marks, and even Margaret Ross allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. But it was the ride home that Mara would remember most clearly. They took 2 wagons, Beckett driving one with the children, Isaiah driving the other with Dottie, and the supplies they'd brought for what might have been a long stay in town. The autumn sun was warm on Mara's face, and the weight that had been pressing on her chest for weeks finally lifted enough that she could breathe properly. Jace sat beside Beckett on the driver's bench, unusually quiet. After a few miles, he finally spoke. What happens now? Now, Beckett glanced at him. Now we go home and get back to living. The guardianship paperwork will take a few more months to finalize, but Judge Hayes made it clear he's approving it. You're all legally mine, and I'm legally yours. That's as permanent as anything gets in this world. But Crowley, Sam said from the back of the wagon, he's not going to just give up, is he? Probably not, Beckett admitted. Men like Crowley don't give up until they get what they want, or until something forces them to stop. But he's out of legal options now. Anything else he tries will be obvious harassment, and Judge Hayes made it clear he won't tolerate that. So we just wait for him to try something else? Mara asked, voicing the fear they all felt. No, Beckett said firmly. We live. We don't put our lives on hold waiting for trouble that might never come. Crowley's already taken enough from us. Weeks of stress, sleepless nights, forcing you all into situations that were harder than they needed to be. I won't give him any more than he's already taken. It sounded simple when he said it like that. Just live. Just keep going. But Mara had learned that simple didn't mean easy. The ranch welcomed them back with the golden light of late afternoon. The cottonwoods were fully turned now, their leaves like coins against the blue sky. The horses in the corral whinnied a greeting, and Martin Webb emerged from the barn with a wave. Everything looked exactly as they'd left it that morning, but somehow different, more solid, more permanent, like the judge's ruling had transformed it from a temporary haven into an actual home. That night, Dottie made a feast: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes with real butter, green beans from the garden, and a pie made with the last of the summer berries. They ate at the long kitchen table, crowded together in a way that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable silences of people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. Afterward, Beckett pulled Mara aside while the others were cleaning up. They stood on the porch, watching the sun sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I wanted to thank you, he said quietly, for what you said today, in the courtroom and at the mercantile. You didn't have to put yourself on the line like that. Yes, I did, Mara said simply. You saved my life. The least I can do is defend yours. That's not how it works, Beckett said. You don't owe me anything, Mara. Not gratitude, not loyalty, not defense. What I did, picking you up on that trail, that wasn't a transaction. It was just the right thing to do. I know, Mara said, but defending you wasn't about debt. It was about truth. Everything I said was true. This place is home. You are... She struggled to find the right words. You're the first person since my mother died who's made me feel like I matter. Not like I'm useful or convenient, but like I actually matter as a person. That's worth defending. Beckett was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the porch rail. Your mother would be proud of you, he said finally. The way you stood up there today, the way you've handled everything these past months, she'd be proud of the person you're becoming. The words hit harder than Mara expected. Her throat went tight, and suddenly she was crying, not the quiet, controlled tears she'd learned to hide, but full, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded. Beckett's arms came around her immediately, and she buried her face in his shirt and cried for everything she'd lost, and everything she'd found, and the terrifying beauty of having something worth losing again. It's all right, Beckett murmured, his hand steady on her back. Let it out. You've been holding too much for too long. When the tears finally subsided, Mara pulled back, embarrassed. I'm sorry. I don't usually... Don't apologize for feeling things, Beckett said firmly. You've earned the right to fall apart occasionally. We all have. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm. School continued, though the other students' attitude shifted after word of the court ruling spread. Some became friendlier, perhaps sensing that the Hale children weren't going anywhere, and it was better to be allies than enemies. Others remained distant, but the open cruelty faded. Mara made a tentative friendship with a girl named Clara, whose father worked at the bank, and Jace joined the informal group of older boys who gathered after school to play baseball in the empty lot behind the church. Rosie thrived. Her friendship with Emma deepened, and she started bringing home stories about school that had nothing to do with fear or uncertainty and everything to do with the normal joys and dramas of childhood. She learned to read fluently, devouring books from the small library Beckett had assembled. She started drawing elaborate pictures of the ranch, the horses, the people who'd become her family. Sam finally got his growth spurt, shooting up 3 inches in as many months and developing the kind of wiry strength that made him valuable for jobs requiring both muscle and agility. Isaiah took him under his wing properly, teaching him everything about running a ranch, from fence repair to cattle management. By winter, Sam was working alongside the adult hands as an equal, earning their respect through competence rather than age. And Jace transformed in ways that were harder to define but no less real. The hard edges that had defined him when he arrived softened. He laughed more easily, argued less defensively, allowed himself to be young in a way he'd been forced to abandon when his parents died. He talked about the future with excitement rather than dread, making plans to save money for his own land someday, to build something the way Beckett had built this ranch. For Mara, the changes were subtler, but just as profound. She stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, stopped measuring every word and action against the possibility that this would be the thing that made Beckett change his mind about wanting her there. She allowed herself to want things: better boots for winter, a journal for writing, time to just sit and read instead of constantly working. And when she asked for these things, they appeared, given not as payment or obligation, but as simple care. The first snow came in late November, transforming the ranch into something out of a fairy tale. Mara stood at her bedroom window watching the flakes fall, remembering the brutal summer heat that had nearly killed her. The contrast felt almost impossible, that she'd survived both extremes, that this place had held her through them. December brought a visitor none of them expected. Mara was helping Dottie prepare dinner when hoofbeats announced someone's arrival. Through the window she saw a wagon pull up, and from it emerged a young woman and a small boy who couldn't have been more than 8. Beckett came out of the barn, wiping his hands on his pants, his expression curious. Mara couldn't hear the conversation from inside, but she saw the moment Beckett's posture changed, recognition or maybe shock crossing his face. He gestured toward the house, and the woman followed, the boy clinging to her hand. When they entered the kitchen, Mara got her first good look at them. The woman was perhaps 25, thin to the point of gauntness, with dark hair and eyes that held the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting too long with too few resources. The boy was a smaller version of her, except for his eyes that were startlingly familiar. "Dottie, Mara," Beckett said, his voice carefully controlled. "This is Rachel Brennan and her son Wes. Rachel says she's—" He stopped, then started again. "She says she's Mara's aunt, her mother's younger sister." The words didn't make sense at first. Mara stared at the woman, searching for any resemblance to her mother and finding none. But then the woman smiled tentatively, and there it was, the exact shape of her mother's smile, the one Mara saw in her own reflection. "I know this is a shock," Rachel said quietly. "I've been trying to find you for 2 years, Mara, ever since I heard about your mother passing. I was working in Denver. I didn't even know she'd gotten sick until it was too late. By the time I got back to Montana, you'd been placed with the Carmichaels, and then they told me you'd run away. I've been searching every mission, every orphanage, every town between here and Billings. A woman at the mercantile in town mentioned a girl named Mara Caldwell living at the Hale Ranch, and I had to see if it was you." Mara's mind was reeling. Family. Real blood family. The thing she'd thought was lost forever, standing in the kitchen looking at her with hope and uncertainty, and something that might have been love. "This is Wes," Rachel continued, urging the boy forward slightly. "He's your brother, half-brother technically, different fathers. Your mother had him after your father left, but before she got really sick. She gave him to me to raise because she knew she couldn't manage alone." A brother. Mara had a brother and she'd never known. She looked at the boy, at Wes, and saw a stranger who carried half her blood, who had the same dark hair and slight build, who was watching her with wide, uncertain eyes. "I don't understand," Mara said, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. "Why didn't my mother tell me about him? Why didn't you come sooner?" "Your mother was proud," Rachel said sadly, too proud to admit she couldn't handle everything on her own. "She sent Wes to me in Denver when he was just a baby, told you he'd died of fever. She thought it would be easier for you that way than knowing you had a brother you couldn't see. And I couldn't come sooner because I was barely surviving myself. I worked in a laundry, lived in a boarding house, no place for children. But I've saved money, and I've got a small house now, a real home. I came to take you back, Mara. You and Wes can be together. We can be a family." The offer hung in the air like smoke. Family. Blood. Family. The thing Mara had thought she wanted more than anything. But as she stood there looking at this stranger who was technically her aunt and the boy who was technically her brother, all she could think about was Rosie's laugh, Jace's terrible jokes, Sam's quiet presence, Dottie's firm kindness, Beckett's steady reliability, the family she'd built from broken pieces and second chances. "I need to think," Mara said finally. It's a lot." Of course, Rachel said quickly. I'm staying at the boarding house in town. Take all the time you need. But Mara, I want you to know that I love you. I always have, even when I couldn't be there for you. You're my sister's daughter, and that means everything to me. After Rachel and Wes left, promising to return in a few days, the ranch fell into stunned silence. Beckett disappeared into his office, and Dottie threw herself into cooking with fierce concentration. Mara stood on the porch, staring at the mountains without really seeing them, trying to process what had just happened. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find all of them there. Jace and Sam and Rosie clustering around her with the protective instinct that had become second nature. "You're not leaving, are you?" Rosie asked, her voice small and scared. "You can't leave. You belong here." "I don't know what I'm doing," Mara admitted. "She's family, real family. And Wes is my brother. How can I just ignore that?" "You don't have to ignore it," Jace said quietly. "But you don't have to choose it over us either. Family isn't just blood, Mara. You taught me that. You and Sam and Rosie, you're my family now more than any aunt or uncle I had before. That doesn't go away just because someone with the same last name shows up." "But what if she's right?" Mara asked. "What if I belong with them instead of here?" "Where do you want to belong?" Sam asked simply. It was the right question, cutting through all the complexity to the simple truth underneath. Where did Mara want to belong? She looked at the ranch spread out before her, the barn where Sam worked alongside Isaiah, the corral where Jace practiced roping, the garden where Rosie helped plant seeds that would bloom come spring. She thought about Dottie's exacting standards and hidden kindness, about Beckett's quiet strength and the way he'd never once made her feel like a burden. She thought about the room upstairs that was hers, the books on her shelf, the knowledge that she mattered to the people here not because of blood, but because of choice. "I want to belong here," she said quietly, "but I want Wes to belong here too. He's my brother. I can't just leave him with a stranger." "Then don't," Beckett said from the doorway. They all turned to find him standing there, his expression thoughtful. "Bring him here. Rachel too if she needs a place. We've got room." "You can't be serious," Mara said. "You've already got 4 of us. You can't just keep taking in every stray that shows up." "Why not?" Beckett asked. "We've already proven we can make this work. What's 2 more? And besides," his expression softened, "that boy's your brother, Mara. You've got a chance to grow up knowing him, to be a real family with him. I won't let you give that up just because you think we're at capacity. We'll make room. We always make room." The next day, Mara rode into town with Beckett to talk to Rachel. They found her at the boarding house, looking haggard from a sleepless night. Wes sat beside her, playing with a wooden horse that had seen better days. "I've been thinking," Rachel said before Mara could speak, "about what's best for you. And the truth is, I can't give you what you have at that ranch. I can barely afford to feed myself and Wes, let alone take on another mouth. I came here thinking I could save you, but maybe you don't need saving. Maybe you've already been saved." "I don't need saving," Mara agreed. "But Wes might, and I want to know my brother. So here's what I'm proposing. You and Wes come to the ranch. There's work for you if you want it. Dottie could use help with the house and the garden, especially as more children come. You'd have a place to live, food, safety, and Wes and I could grow up together the way we were supposed to." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "You'd do that? After I wasn't there for you? After I let your mother lie to you about your own brother?" "You were surviving," Mara said simply. "I understand survival, but now we can do more than survive. We can actually live, all of us together." It took another week to arrange, but by mid-December, Rachel and Wes had moved into the ranch. Rachel took over some of Dottie's responsibilities with visible relief. The older woman's knees had been bothering her, though she'd never admitted it. Wes fit into the group of children with the easy adaptability of the young, following Sam around like a shadow and adopting Rosie as a protective older sister. And Mara finally had her brother back. They sat together in the evenings while Rachel told stories about their mother, the good years before the fever, before the hardship, when she'd been young and happy and full of dreams. Mara learned things she'd never known, that her mother had loved to sing, that she'd wanted to be a teacher, that she'd named Mara after her own mother who died when Rachel was young. The pieces of her past that had been missing started to fill in, and with them came a kind of peace Mara hadn't known she needed. Christmas came, and Beckett hired a photographer to take a picture of them all. Beckett standing tall in the center, Dottie beside him with her usual stern expression softened by the hint of a smile, Isaiah and Rachel flanking them, and arrayed in front 6 children who'd found their way home through different paths but had all arrived at the same destination. When the photograph was developed, Beckett had it framed and hung in the main room where everyone could see it. "So we remember," he said simply, "so we never forget what we built here." The winter passed in the way Montana winters did, hard and beautiful, full of snow that transformed the world into something clean and new. The children took turns with chores, helped each other with schoolwork, argued and made up and learned the rhythms of family life. Rachel proved to have a gift for healing, and Doc Pritchard started teaching her basic medicine, recognizing someone with both talent and dedication. Spring came with the usual drama of calving season, and everyone old enough to help did, working through cold nights to save breech births and nurse weak calves. Mara discovered she had a steady hand with the newborns, a patience that made the frantic mothers calm. Beckett watched her work one night and said quietly, "You're good at this, at caring for things." "I learned from you," Mara said. "No," Beckett said. "You already had it in you. I just gave you a safe place to let it show." In May, 3 months after Rachel and Wes had arrived, Gideon Crowley appeared at the ranch for the 3rd time. But this time, he came alone, on foot, looking older and diminished in a way that had nothing to do with age. Beckett met him at the gate, his posture wary. "Crowley, didn't expect to see you here again." "I know," Crowley said quietly. "I came to apologize." The words hung there, unexpected and uncomfortable. Beckett didn't invite him closer, didn't relax his guard. Apologize for what exactly? The accusations, the hearing, trying to destroy what we built here? "All of it," Crowley said. "I was wrong. About you, about the children, about everything. I let my grief over my daughter turn into anger at you, and I let that anger make me cruel. What you're doing here, what you've built, it's good. It's real. And I tried to destroy it because I couldn't stand seeing you move on when I was still stuck in the past." "Emily dying wasn't your fault either," Beckett said after a long moment. "Scarlet fever took her same as it took Sarah. We were both just fathers watching our children die and not being able to stop it." "I know that now," Crowley said. "My wife finally made me see it. Made me understand that punishing you wouldn't bring Emily back, that all I was doing was creating more pain in a world that already has too much of it." He paused, his hands twisting his hat. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm done. No more complaints, no more rumors, no more fighting. You win, Hale. Or rather, those children win. They deserve what you're giving them." Beckett studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. I accept your apology, and I'm sorry too, for anything I said or did that made your grief harder. We both lost daughters. We both know that particular hell. Maybe it's time we stopped making it worse for each other." Crowley's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you." He turned to go, then stopped. "One more thing. The water rights dispute we had last spring. I'm withdrawing my claim. The water's yours. Use it however you need to." After Crowley left, Beckett stood at the gate for a long time, staring at the road. Mara approached quietly, standing beside him in comfortable silence. "Do you believe him?" she asked finally. "I think grief makes people do terrible things," Beckett said. "And I think recognizing that and trying to make amends takes more courage than staying angry. So yeah, I believe him, or at least I'm willing to give him the chance to prove he means it." "That's very generous of you," Mara observed. "Not generous," Beckett said. "Just practical. Holding grudges takes energy I'd rather spend on better things, like making sure you kids don't burn down the barn trying to teach Wes how to ride." "That was one time," Mara protested, "and the barn didn't actually catch fire." "It was smoking," Beckett pointed out, but he was smiling. The years that followed were marked not by dramatic events, but by the steady accumulation of small, perfect moments. Jace turned 18 and took on more responsibility at the ranch, eventually becoming Isaiah's official partner in managing operations. Sam finished school and decided to stay, building a small house on the far end of the property where he could have independence but still be close to the family. Rosie grew into a thoughtful, confident young woman who decided she wanted to be a teacher, much to everyone's pride. Wes thrived, growing from a shy 8-year-old into a boisterous teenager who had Beckett's gift with horses and Rachel's gentle touch with healing. He and Mara maintained the close bond of siblings who'd been separated and reunited, protective of each other in ways that went beyond normal brother-sister dynamics. Rachel married eventually, Doc Pritchard, of all people, who'd been widowed years before and had fallen quietly in love with her competence and compassion. They built a house in town but spent most weekends at the ranch, the boundaries between the two households fluid and comfortable. And Mara grew into someone she wouldn't have recognized at 11. She became Beckett's right hand in ways that went beyond ranch work, helping coordinate the informal network of support the ranch had become for struggling families in the valley. When children needed placing, they came to the Hale Ranch first. When families needed help, they knew where to ask. The ranch became legendary in its own quiet way, a place where second chances were given freely and family was defined by choice rather than blood. On Mara's 18th birthday, Beckett gave her a deed. She unfolded it with shaking hands and read that he'd divided the ranch into shares, one for him, one for Isaiah, one for Dottie, and one for each of the original 4 children. Mara, Jace, Sam, and Rosie would inherit equal portions, ensuring the ranch would stay in the family they'd built together. "You can't do this," Mara whispered. "It's too much." "It's exactly right," Beckett said firmly. "This ranch is as much yours as it is mine. You've bled for it, worked for it, defended it when it needed defending. That makes it yours by right, not just by gift." But it was 3 months later, on an ordinary Tuesday in August, when Mara truly understood the depth of what Beckett had given them. She was in town running errands when she saw him, a man in his 50s, weathered and hard-looking, asking after the Hale Ranch at the Mercantile. Something about his manner made Mara's instincts flare, and she lingered near the fabric counter, listening. "I heard they take in orphans," the man was saying. "Got a couple of kids, brother and sister. Parents died. I'm their uncle, but I can't keep them. Looking to place them somewhere decent." Mrs. Patterson, who'd become an unlikely ally after the court case, gave him directions to the ranch, and Mara slipped out quickly to ride ahead. She found Beckett in the barn and told him what she'd heard, describing the man in detail. Beckett's face went carefully neutral. Did he say his name? No, but there was something wrong about him. The way he talked about the kids. It reminded me of how Mrs. Carmichael talked about me before she threw me out, like they were problems he needed to solve rather than people he cared about. "Good instincts," Beckett said. "When he gets here, I'll handle it, but I want you nearby in case we need to move fast." The man arrived an hour later, driving a wagon with 2 children huddled in the back. A boy about 12 and a girl maybe 9, both looking terrified in a way that went beyond normal fear. Mara's stomach clenched. She recognized that look. It was the same one she'd seen in her own reflection 7 years ago. Beckett met the man in the yard, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. Mara stationed herself on the porch where she could see and hear everything. "Name's Harold Crenshaw," the man said, climbing down from the wagon. "These are my niece and nephew, Katie and Peter Morrison. Parents died in a fire last month. I'm looking to place them somewhere they'll be properly cared for." "And you are?" Beckett asked. "Their mother's brother," Crenshaw said. "Only family they got left. But I'm not set up for children. Got a mining claim up north. No place for kids. Heard you take in orphans here." "We provide homes for children who need them," Beckett corrected. "Not quite the same thing as taking in orphans like they're stray cattle." Something flashed in Crenshaw's eyes, anger, quickly suppressed. "Figure of speech. Point is, I can't keep them, and they need placing. You interested or not?" Beckett didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the wagon and addressed the children directly. "I'm Beckett Hale. This is my ranch. Would you two like to come inside, get some water and something to eat while I talk with your uncle?" The children looked at Crenshaw, clearly seeking permission. He nodded curtly, and they scrambled down from the wagon with the desperate eagerness of people escaping something terrible. Mara met them at the porch, leading them inside where Dottie immediately took over, settling them at the kitchen table with milk and fresh bread. Through the window, Mara watched Beckett and Crenshaw talk, saw the conversation grow heated, saw Beckett's posture shift from neutral to dangerous. Finally, Beckett turned and walked toward the house, leaving Crenshaw standing by his wagon. He came straight to Mara, his face grim. "Go to town," he said quietly. "Get Sheriff Brennan. Tell him we've got a situation that needs immediate attention, and bring Doc Pritchard too." Mara didn't question. She rode hard, returning within the hour with both men. By then, Beckett had the children in the main house, had examined their arms and backs, had documented what he'd found with the cold precision of someone building a legal case. The bruises told their story. So did the scars. So did the way Peter flinched when anyone moved too quickly, and the way Katie kept apologizing for everything, even breathing too loudly. Sheriff Brennan arrested Harold Crenshaw on suspicion of child abuse before the sun set. Doc Pritchard examined the children thoroughly, his face growing darker with each injury he cataloged. And Beckett sat with them while they gave their statements, his presence steady and safe, promising them without words that they were protected now. The investigation that followed revealed that the children's parents hadn't died in a fire. They died of influenza, and Crenshaw had taken the children not out of family obligation, but because their father had left a small inheritance. He'd been using them as unpaid labor at his mining claim, beating them when they couldn't keep up with the work, planning to abandon them once the money ran out. He was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in territorial prison. The children remained at the Hale Ranch, where they slowly learned that adult men didn't always hurt and that homes could be safe. That evening, after the children were settled and the house had quieted, Mara found Beckett on the porch again, their usual spot for important conversations. The summer night was warm, the stars brilliant overhead. "7 years ago," Mara said quietly, "you found me dying on a cattle trail. Today, you saved 2 more children from a different kind of death. How many times are you going to do this?" "As many times as I have to," Beckett said simply. "As long as there are children who need saving and I have the means to save them." "We," Mara corrected. "As long as we have the means to save them. This isn't just your fight anymore, Beckett. It's all of ours." He looked at her, really looked, the way he had that first day when he'd found her in the heat. But this time what he saw wasn't a dying child. He saw a grown woman who'd survived abandonment and heat stroke and court battles, and had come out stronger, who'd built a family from nothing and was prepared to defend it with everything she had. "When did you grow up?" he asked softly. "Gradually," Mara said, "and then all at once. Same as everyone else." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the house, Dottie was settling the new children into rooms that had been prepared so many times they practically readied themselves. In the bunkhouse, Jace and Sam were probably arguing about something inconsequential. In town, Rachel and Doc Pritchard were likely finishing their evening rounds. Wes was asleep in his room, safe and whole. Rosie was reading by lamplight, preparing for the teacher's exam she'd take in the fall. The family they'd built, unconventional, sprawling, held together by choice rather than blood, was intact and growing. The ranch that had saved Mara's life 7 summers ago had become a place that saved lives as naturally as breathing, and would continue to do so long after any of them were gone. "Thank you," Mara said into the darkness, "for not leaving me to die in the sun that day." "Thank you for not dying," Beckett replied, "for surviving long enough for me to find you, for staying even when it was hard, for teaching me that family doesn't have to look traditional to be real." "We taught each other," Mara said, and that ultimately was the truth of it. They'd all saved each other in different ways at different times, building something that was greater than any of them individually. The summer that had nearly killed Mara had instead become the beginning of something extraordinary, a home that never closed its doors, a family that always made room, a legacy of second chances that would echo through generations. The heat that had been an enemy became warmth. The abandonment that had been death became freedom. And the broken pieces of damaged lives became something whole and beautiful and enduring. Years later, when Mara was older and the ranch had grown to include dozens of children over the decades, when Beckett had passed peacefully in his sleep and been buried on the hill overlooking the property he'd built, when the original 4 children had become parents and grandparents themselves, even then, the gate remained open. The legacy continued, and every summer, when the heat pressed down on the Montana prairie, Someone would find their way to that gate, desperate and broken and hoping for salvation. And they would find it, because that's what the Hale Ranch did. That's what family, real family, chosen family, had always done. They opened their doors, they made room, they saved whoever needed saving. And they did it with the same steady dedication that Beckett had shown that first summer when he'd found a dying girl on a cattle trail and decided that saving her life was simply the right thing to do. The legacy endured summer after summer because some things, some essential human things like compassion and courage and choosing to help when you could, those things never went out of season. They just kept burning, warm and bright as summer sun, lighting the way home for everyone still searching.